Is how can I truly be forgiven? Okay, do you wonder if you sin so much that you've sinned in the past and that God could never forgive you or has not forgiven you? You know, there's a lot of people walking around these days that say, oh, how can God ever forgive me for what I did? Oh, you know, and carry this guilt, this burden, almost like a heavy backpack, you know, almost hunchback over. You know, but lack of forgiveness can destroy families, marriages, relationships between parents, between husband and wives, relationships between parents and children. You know, it is hard. And a lot of times because we don't ask for forgiveness because we think, oh man, I really did it this time. I can't go on, you know, I can't, Lord, just forgive me, Lord. And we think that's enough. Well, let me tell you about a person. I'm going to tell you two stories before I really get into the message. And really my message is based in Psalms 32 and 51, okay? But for now, listen to this. You know, when you have that guilt on you or that burden, you might come back at me and say, why haven't you forgiven them? And you might say, you don't know what I went through. You don't know how hard this was. You don't know what they did to me, you know, type of thing. Well, let me tell you about a man who committed murder, adultery, committed total deceit, thinking, oh man, you know, nobody's going to know about this. Or even, you know, just, I won't tell anybody and it'll be okay. But you know what? God still forgave that person. And he went on to do great things for God. You know, forgiveness is the watershed of life. And let me tell you the first story. And this is an interview that they had with this woman, and it's in the U.S. News magazine. She led a life of deceit and guilt for 23 years, and depression just set in. Here's her interview. Her name was Catherine Powers. She was a student, but described as armed and very dangerous. In 1970, Catherine Powers was an accomplice to a bank robbery. And there, a policeman was killed. He was a hero policeman. He did great things, and he was the father of 9 children. And for 23 years, she hid her past, changing her name, the city she lived in, never driving faster than the speed limit. And if she felt threatened, she would get up and move to another place, another city, change her name, even losing contact with her parents and 6 siblings so that they wouldn't know or tell or she couldn't confide in. You know, at the age of 44, after 23 years of running and being consumed with guilt and desperately tired of the life she was living, she was looking for help. It was so unbearable for her. So she started seeing a counselor. And after months of therapy, she was diagnosed with chronic depression. Now she was ready to face whatever consequences the legal system was ready to impose of her. Because this is how she describes what she went through and how she felt. It was waves and waves of unbearable sadness, each one worse and stronger than the one before. Catherine would try to fight back. She would get so intense in her work and say, I'm going to just focus on this and get this done, and never mind about the hour, I'll just keep working, just so she could avoid the depression and the sadness she felt. She even took up exercising and even tried prayer, and it didn't work. After many sessions, she realized that her emotional difficulties would never end until she turned herself in. She had to come clean and give herself up as a fugitive. So for 23 years, she fooled the FBI and every law enforcement you could think of in America, but she could not escape the guilt and shame that she felt in her own heart. So one day, knowing she would have to spend the next 10 years in prison, she said, I did it. I'm confessing to you, I'm the guilty one. I did it. And afterwards she said, it felt like something just lifted off of me. She said, I could not have taken any more time to wait. I couldn't, she said. Now she's learning the truth and is experiencing life, and not with a distorted lens. We don't know too much about guilt or talk about it too much, but it's a powerful force, okay? Then I'm going to tell you a little snippet of the man I was talking to you about, a man who was a murderer, an adulterer, deceit, great deceit, okay? And you'll find his story, and you can read it later because it's very interesting in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. But for now, listen to this. David is the man who experienced the same similar powers. It didn't take him 23 years to confess, but one long year, and that was long enough. He almost didn't. You might say it almost ate his lunch, is a term that was used. And in Psalms, when he describes it and what he did was something that similar to what Catherine went through. So David, as you know, was a powerful king. He was a sweet singer of Israel, as known. And in his midlife, he plunged into a double sin, almost recentering him as useless. Remember, he was a spiritual leader. He wrote most of the Psalms because he was in love with the Lord. He had the joy of his salvation, but something happened. And in Samuel 2:11, he said, he should have really been off to war with his troops. His troops were fighting, and he should have been there to support them, give them directions, but no, he was at his palace. And one evening, if you were ever to, I don't know if any of you have ever gone to Israel, but in Israel, their patios are on the roof. And so with King David, he went on the roof, probably to get a break, probably to feel the fresh air, after his duties as a king in the palace. And he went to the roof of his palace, and he says, There, across the way, he saw a beautiful woman bathing. And he saw her, and he said, wow, she is beautiful. I have to have her. And he sent his messenger to go and bring her to the palace. And there, he committed adultery with her. And realizing what he had done, the guilt set in, and he's like, oh, now what do I do? How do I take care of this? Oh my gosh, I'm going to be discredited in my kingdom. The king, look what he's done. He's got 700, 900 wives, and he takes this woman that is married. Oh no. But you know what? David said, I don't know what, I'll take care of it. He sent for his general, and he said, his name was Joab. He said, go and bring me Uriah, which is Bathsheba's husband. Bring him here. I want to talk to him. And of course, Uriah was at war, but they pulled him out. He went to the king. And as they were going to bring Uriah to King David got word from Bathsheba that she was pregnant. Now I really got to do something. Do you see how it's mounting? He went from doing adultery. Now he's trying to see how he can get out of it by deceit. So he brought Uriah, and he says, Uriah, you have been a good soldier, loyal, faithful. I see from your reports from your general that you're great, I want you to go and spend the night with your wife. I'm sending you wine, good food. Go have a good time. And Uriah goes, but king, how can I do that? My fellow soldiers are out there on the line. Some of them might be killed, and you want me to go and have a good time with my wife? No, I will not. And so David says, come on, go. And he wouldn't go. That night, Uriah slept in the steps, outside the steps of the palace. And the next day, David saw that he was there again and says, Uriah, go. It's okay. You can have a good time. You don't have to be so concerned. They're doing a good job out there. Nope, he didn't go. Said the king. Now what do? He won't go. I cannot say, he has a night with his wife and she comes out pregnant. That's your child, and I'll never be in the picture. They'll never know it's mine. But it didn't work that way. So Uriah would not go. Called General Joab to me. General Joab came, and he says, I want you to take, King David said, I want you to take Uriah and put him in the hottest part of the battle. And then I want you to retreat the rest of your soldiers. General Joab, being loyal, said, I'll do what you say. Okay? Off they went. And sure enough, the battle, they put him where the battle was the worst, the hottest, and there he was killed. Oh my goodness. You know, they honored him at his funeral as being honorable, you know, a strong soldier, you know, all kinds of stuff they told about Uriah at his funeral. And there was a time of mourning that went on, I don't know how many days or weeks they mourned. But once that period was over, David calls Bathsheba to the palace and marries her. And now he has a wife, Bathsheba. But there is, you would think, oh, well, that's the end of the story, right? Wrong. I don't know, I'm trying to be organized here, but it's not working. Now, you say, okay, now they're going to have a happy life. They're going to, you know, he's going to be happy. He's got his beautiful woman, blah, blah, blah. Nathan, who was a prophet, or you might call him a preacher, was talking to God one day. And God told him, I want you to go to David and you tell him what he has done. I am displeased with him. And you know what? At that time, Nathan says, oh Lord, you're sending me to the most powerful man, and you want me to go tell him what he's done? You know, he has the power to kill me. He has the power to hang me. He has the power to get rid of me. Are you sure you want little old me to go? Okay. So on his way, Nathan, as he was walking, he said, I can't just tell him, David, God knows what you did. No, he said, I know. I'll tell him a story. And so when Nathan got there, King David was happy to see me. He thought he had a message from God. And he says, how are you doing, Nathan? Come on in, come. Let's sit. What do you have to say? Let me start off by sharing a little story of what has happened. He said there was a poor man and a rich man. And the poor man had one little, what do they call it? A ewe, E-W-E, a ewe lamb. And a rich man had all kinds of lambs, sheep, you name it. He was rich. He had everything. And this poor man loved his little lamb. He took care of it. He slept with it. He even drank from its cup and just took care of this little lamb. He was precious to him. One day, the rich man had a traveler come by, a guest. And he says, I don't have time to go kill one of my sheep. He says, I know who has one right away, and we can get it, and we'll be ready for my guests. He went and took the lamb of the poor man and served it to the rich man. And David, when he heard that, was furious. He said, what? He did what? Oh, tell me who that is. He will have to pay 4 times over what he has done. This is despicable. Who does that? Who takes from the poor when he has riches of all kinds? And guess what? Nathan was ready for that open door. With his bony finger, he says, you are that person. You are that rich man. God knows what you've done. You have committed adultery. You've taken Bathsheba, who is married to Uriah, and now Uriah is dead. You have displeased the Lord. And David was like, oh, he knows. God knows. You know, God knows everything, right? And so, you know, confession is when you confess, it's something that people already know, you know. And so I want to read to you or show you Psalms 51, verse 1, David's confession and how it was genuine, okay? But before that, brother, can you put up the superscription that is right above? That's why I know it was truly what David wrote, is the superscription that is right before. And as the brother is bringing it up, let me read it to you. For the director of music, a psalm of David. And when the prophet Nathan came to him after David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. And you know what? That to me is like confirmation what David wrote in Psalms 51. You know, in Psalms 32, you're going to find what he was going through almost that whole year. You know, Charles Spurgeon, who is a great Bible scholar, said, David before was just penning his psalms all over the place. You know, he was just going because he was in fellowship with God. He was, God was speaking to him. But when he did what he did, there was no fellowship. It was nothing there. And Charles Spurgeon said it probably was about a year that he had not penned a psalm. And so, you know, whenever there's a confession to be made, there has to be a confrontation. And so Nathan confronted David. And now David has to confess. And you know what? David says, you don't know what a relief that was, that you know, and that I don't have to carry this by myself. And so Psalms 54, verse 1 says, have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgression. You know, transgression can be something that is, I wrote it here, something that is very, like evil or rebellion against God. That's what transgression is. And he's saying in verse 2, wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sins. Before I go on to the next one, let me tell you, when you want something blotted out, like say that you wrote something or you have a piece of paper, you'll get a black marker, right? And you can just, and that whole thing is gone. You don't have it there anymore. And that's what David was saying. He says, blot out my transgression, my rebellion. Okay? And let me turn this page. He also goes on to say, you know, with this, Lord, in verse 3, he says, call it sin, which means, let's see, for I know my transgression, and my sin is always before me. So sin is to miss the mark. You missed what God wanted you to do, okay? And then verse 4 says, verse 4? Okay. That's 3. I can't see it up there, so I'm going to read it from here. Against you, Lord, and you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. So in Psalms 51, he's feeling the guilt. He's in verse 2, he says, wash away my iniquities, which iniquity means acting in perversion, in distortion, acting unjustly or crookedly, okay? And so he's confessing to God what he's done and the evil that he's done, and that he deserves condemnation. And you know, these words are Hebrew words, and they're very graphic according to our language that we use here. But David says to the Lord, what I did was very wrong. There was no candy coating on his transgression. If we go back and you see where in verse 3 it says, for I know my transgression. I know what I've done, and how can I do this? And if we go to Psalms 32:5, it talks about, he's saying, then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. And so you see, it's a situation like Catherine and David, and they feel the guilt and the remorse they did, that they couldn't take it anymore. You know, carry this guilt and remorse for a long time it just separates you from having that joy, that peace, that fellowship with God. You know, and if we go to Psalms 51:7-8, here's where David writes when he was confronted with his sin. There was such a relief that he felt. He said, cleanse me with hyssop. You know, hyssop was a Jewish ritual that whenever you came in contact with the dead, they would take that. The Jewish people had a really thing about the dead, touching the dead or being around the dead. They would take hyssop and they would just scrub themselves. And this is what David is saying, cleanse me with hyssop, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. And this is what he's saying, oh Lord, forgive me, forgive me. I tell you, when we sin and do not confess before the Lord, we are the most miserable people, and we seem so far away from God. No matter what you've done, brothers and sisters, you can be forgiven. And we will hear how we can be free. God knows everything. So the ones that are hurting we're the ones hurting ourselves. Because look at the ones, not only do we hurt ourselves, but those that are affected by it. Look at David's case. David knew the people he had hurt. Bathsheba, whose purity had been taken. Uriah, who was now dead. Joab, his general, his integrity was violated. And Nathan, the prophet, knew. And oh yeah, the Lord knew what he had done. You know, David's confession was from his heart, and that's what it should be for us. And I tell you, the thing that matters the most is that you come before him and say, Lord, just like David, I have sinned. Forgive me, Lord. You know, if we go to Psalms 51:17, his confession was, oh God, my sacrifice, oh God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite. And contrite means to say you're expressing remorse. So a broken and contrite heart, you, God, will not despise. David knew there were people who were hurt by what he had done, and he was so sorry. You know, David lied, murdered, deceit, but David knew in Psalms 51:4, you don't have to go there, brother, but I'll read it, where it says, against you and you alone have I sinned, O God. So David knew he had injured God's heart. And when we sin and do not confess, we can't be in fellowship with God. We lose that fellowship until we confess. He knows. How can we worship when we know, oh God, you know, what I've done? So when we confess, first there's that, you know, confrontation and then confession, and then asking for forgiveness. You know, he wants our sins to be blotted out. Just like in the olden days when they wrote with ink and a feather, and they did writing and it blotted, made a big old mark. That's what he was saying. I don't want to blot out my sins. I don't want this to be in the archives of heaven, is what he's telling God. Get a black marker and mark it out. And verse 2 of 51 says, God, I want you to wash me clean, Lord. I don't want to be, cleanse me, take away the leprosy. This sin from me is a leprosy. Take it away from me. And you know, in Psalms 51:12, it says, restore to me the joy of your salvation. David in Psalms 32 was telling you what he went through. It was almost like his, you know, carrying this load on his back. And he almost called it a word that we don't use today, but it makes sense. He says, unsin me, Lord, from this. Take it away. I don't want it. Unsin me. And restore the joy of the salvation. You know, forgiveness is something that we all should look for. I don't care if you think, well, they did it to me first, so, you know, how can I, if they apologize, I'll apologize. Be the bigger person and apologize. And I could give you a bunch of verses where God forgives. He wants to forgive. He is just waiting for you to ask him. He's like this, come, child. Let me forgive you. I know what you've been carrying for yesterday or last year or 20 years ago. I still can forgive you. And I just wanted to share this real quick just to give you an insight. You know, one day a nun went to a bishop for confession. And she shared that Christ had revealed herself to her in person. And the bishop was doubtful. Oh, yeah? Well, I have some instructions for you, he told her. The next time, ask Christ to that he reveals himself to you, the sins of the archbishop. So the next time, and she said, yeah, then I will. I'll ask him. So the next time that confession rolled around, she went to him. And the bishop said, well, did you ask Christ to reveal the sins of the archbishop? I did, she said. And what did he say? He said, I've forgotten them. So when you ask for forgiveness, your sins are cast as far as the east is from the west, into the sea of forgetfulness, never to be remembered again. Never. God forgives you and forgets. You know, I'm going to finish with this, with a story of Catherine Powers and David. You know, the Lord will not erase history. And sometimes there are things in motion, and when we are out of fellowship with God, there's a matter, or I should say, there's a cause and effect. If you did this, this is going to affect you. You know, it's in the law, and that's the way it is. There's a cause and effect. What you reap is what you sow. And even when we've been restored back into fellowship and the forgiveness process has been done, and we have to face the consequences of our sins. You know, continuing with Catherine Power in her interview, she was asked after all these years, who do you feel the most sympathy for? And they asked her, is it the children who lost their father, the family who lost a daughter, or the young woman who lost her way in the tumult of the 60s? I have to say, there are others who are suffering. She married and had a husband when she was running. And so now he has a wife who is in jail. And during that time, she had a son born to her, while she was a fugitive, and now he's without a mother. And even the best intentions on some things can never be made right. You know, when David responded to Nathan, who did this with the rich man? And he'll have to repay 4 times what he did wrong. David wasn't wrong about that. If you read 2 Samuel 12, the child that was conceived between him and Bathsheba, 3 months later, died. The daughter that he had, her name was Tamar, was raped by David's son, Ammon. And David, because of what he had done, he did not feel he was capable of judging him, because his credibility wasn't there. And his son, Absalom, was very upset that his dad didn't take and do something with Ammon for what he had done and shamed his, sister. So he says, okay, I'll take it into my own hand. So Absalom killed Ammon. And then later, Absalom was not happy with his dad. He says, you're no good. You're not a king. You don't do what you're supposed to do. And he tried to take the kingdom from him. And he was killed. And David found Absalom. He had beautiful long hair, as it'll be described in the scriptures. And David found him hanging by his hair on a tree. So you see, there's consequences for what we do. And if you read the scriptures, you can almost hear David weeping for his son. Oh, Absalom, Absalom. Oh, my son. God just doesn't take a magic brush and say, okay, this never happened. There are There are consequences, okay? And there are two possibilities, okay, that we can, we know that can happen. And you young people, listen, because a lot of times you think, I'm going to get away with this, you know. Nobody will ever know. But when you are going down that road, think carefully how to protect yourself from it. You know, the first possibility is you think you can get away with sin, but the Bible tells us you can't. It says, be sure your sin will find you out today, tomorrow, next week, but it'll find you out, okay? You can say, nobody will know this, we covered it up well. If only one person knows, that's enough. You know, Catherine did her best for 23 years to keep a secret. Not even her husband knew at first, but she knew, and that was enough for it to get out. We have this idea today that if we have a God, that is a big grandfather that pats us on the head and says, it's okay, it's okay. You can do what you want to do and get your kicks while you're doing it, but just remember this, there's kickbacks, okay? Don't think you will be the one to get away with it, because you won't. Nobody does. And even though we have messed up, and we all have messed up, who can look at another person and say, I don't know what she's talking about. I've never done anything. Nope. Yes, we have to ask for that hyssop. We all have had to. Here's the second impossibility, okay? You might think you might get away with sin, but you cannot. Listen to me. You cannot get away from the love of God. It is impossible to get away from His love. The very fact that you're here, brothers and sisters, is that God wanted you to hear this. That you are here because He wants you to be forgiven. He wants you to say, Lord, forgive me. If you've gotten into a place and you want nobody to know, you might say, it is bad. Oh, it's really bad. I can't even talk about it. I don't care. God will come after you. You might have to feel the sting of what you've done, but He won't let go. He'll come after you. You may be unlovable. He will never stop loving you. You know, I know of a young man I was talking to, and it just broke my heart to hear him say, why did God forget me? Why did He not help me when I needed help? Why couldn't He just make me like everybody else? But He didn't forget him. He still loves him. And the same way with you, God loves you with with His arms wide open. He says, come, daughter, come, son, let me forgive you. Have life everlasting. Come into my arms. You know, if you are thinking, I'll do this later. We don't have later promised. Do it now. And so with that, I'm going to end with an altar call. If you feel that this message touched you and you want to be forgiven, we want to pray for you. We just want to come to the altar and say, Lord, here I am. I'm telling you, I am giving everything over to you. And so our altar is here, and those of you who feel led to come up, please come up as Brother plays this song.